is usually visual art. And the way that I came about it is that similar to what Roxanne said, I'm interested in this kind of leveling of what people call high art, low art. I'm interested in all of it. And, in the same way that like CLR James is talking about how, in our communities, we're all talking about, because I love this democratization of the critic now, how we all have this voice because we have access to social media and everybody has this, access to talk about and have these reaction videos and respond to, the statue that's in Times Square, made by Thomas J. Price, or, Sinners. We all have this moment now where we can have that ability to respond. And then I really love that because, growing up, that's what we used to do. We would watch a film and then we would talk about it. When I had my kids, we would go and watch films all the time and always have these conversations. My older daughter's in the audience, and we would always have these conversations about who was your favorite character, what was your favorite part of the film, and then, as they got older, we would talk more about the films. So I kind of fell into it because, I was in the academic field, and I just really felt like there was so much that was that I appreciated about. At the time, it was like music. I was writing for The Wire. And then there was this book that was by Spooky, the Subliminal Kid, who was, I know he changed his name, because at the time that's what he was called. And the editor, I'm going off now, but like the editor, because I didn't say negative things about him, they pulled the piece. And I just remember thinking, that I didn't want to have that experience ever again. And my point is that it's challenging having that relationship with a magazine or, a publisher, because you don't know how they're going to receive the work. And so I'm really happy to be working with, especially contemporary, and because there's this kind of really nice relationship that we have as more symbiotic.
I like what you're saying, Nan, about sort of this innate desire that we all have to respond and to critique. It's within all of us. And I guess I'm curious for each of you if there are methods, movements, writers, genealogies that you will always respond to.
That's a really interesting question, because I think critique is a way of expressing deep intimacy. And so there is a way in which Nan mentioned Sinners, that there are artworks that engage with canons, movements, like figures, archetypes that are kind of like deeply rooted in my, feeling about self, nation, people, place, that it always feels fraught, but I don't know, there does feel like a necessity. So somebody that I'm really interested in is the writer Glenn Lowry. He's a conservative. He's at Brown University, and like I could not disagree with his politics more. But because everything that I have been reviewing for too long, this memoir he wrote about himself. Will I ever finish the piece? Almost doesn't matter. But because he is responding to something that really matters to me, which is what is black politics after the civil rights movement, like the great heights of the 60s, all the acts are passed, and then the kind of hangover after all, the assassination of Dr. King, et cetera, et cetera. The way the 70s and 80s played out and sort of produced all the people that I know. I'm really interested in that. So anybody from any political persuasion who is working in that wake. I just recently did a review of a new exhibition at the Guggenheim, the artist Rashid Johnson. And he's like working in that moment and space and reacting to the black arts movement and other stuff that it's like fundamental to my understanding of myself and of art, et cetera. I do think that most writers, it seems to me, have one or two or three things like that that they feel almost urged in a kind of family way to be involved in?
I'm always interested in the cultural moment, what's happening now, and what the art that we consume is saying about what's happening now. So, for example, I recently saw Purpose, which was outstanding and really rich, layered. And I was also interested in the audience, because most Broadway shows, it's fairly monochromatic. And there are a lot of reasons for that. But with Purpose, it was kind of like Us, and then like a sprinkling of monochrome. And it was just a different experience. People were a lot more actively engaged with what was happening on stage, and you rarely see that. And so it made me start to think of a play as like a living text, because it's not something that is flat the way in a film or a TV show is, because it's dynamic. It's happening every single night, and there are things you cannot anticipate. And so I was really interested in the play and what it had to say, but also what it brought out in the audience and how it brought this extra dimension to the play. And so I'm always looking for things like that, where I can make those kinds of connections based on something that I've recently read or seen or engaged with. And of course, I have to review every book I read, but I do that on Goodreads. And I do review books for official places, but for my day-to-day reading, I always go on Goodreads, and I just tell people, this is not for authors. Goodreads is for readers, and I engage with Goodreads as a reader. And I really enjoy being able to talk about the books that I'm reading and what I think, and I don't actually love everything. And if you love everything, you don't have taste. So I'm very honest on Goodreads, and people get very upset. Like, a man wrote me once, and was like,
It's already bad. This is already.
and I gave him a mid-review because I said, this book is not for me. It does not interest me. The topic is not interesting. And so, take that in mind as you read this review, but, here are the things the author does brilliantly. And he was like, I just don't understand why the subject doesn't interest you. And I'm like, I don't know what to tell you, but it is what it is. And so I'm also always interested in how people respond to criticism, because it always tells you a little bit about them and about what they expect. And so the other sort of guiding light for me is to forget about how people are going to engage with the criticism until after I've written it, so that I don't temper what it is that I have to say.
The film that I really enjoyed this year was on becoming a guinea fowl, and I haven't written about it, but I think the thing that I really love about it is that it's a Zambian filmmaker, and I feel like people talk about the film industry as it's all about Marvel, or it's all. I feel like people get very myopic about the film industry, and we're always talking about the American film industry. And it's so refreshing to see something that's outside of the States. I like to watch a lot of non-American films, because I feel like there are stories that are black tales, black diasporic stories that are relevant to us here, that are outside of here. And so it's important to see, and that story was really relevant. There was a part in it where the aunties kind of are very demanding. I mean, there's all the way through they're very demanding. The lead character can't, she's an adult. She's like a woman in her maybe late 30s, but she can't get through to the aunties. She can't challenge them. And I don't know about you, but I've definitely had that experience with West African aunties, with Caribbean aunties, where you can't push them. They're the law, and whatever they say is what you do. So there's interesting kind of elements in the film that were relevant to my experience. And there was a friend of mine who is I'm in a curatorial film collective, and the Black Aesthetic that Daniela mentioned, and one of my colleagues, Jamal, didn't like the ending, and I really loved the ending. So it was really interesting to have this conversation with him, because I just felt the ending, I'm not going to give any spoilers, but the ending was like just so triumphant. And you know when you just come out of a film and you just feel so good. And it reminded me of this feeling that I had with Planet of the Apes, because I'm like this kid I just loved Planet of the Apes growing up. You know, I know it's challenging because they're on many levels. I mean, I know it's racist, right, and on many levels. But, even as a kid, I was like, this is really complex, you know. I could see the shadism. There were, you know, there was a lot of issues with it, but I really, really loved that show. So when that new series came out of films, I was just so pumped. And like when Caesar just speaks at the end of that film, like I'm still getting shivers now. I love that series. I really love it. And at the time, I was living in California, in the Bay Area as well, which was so scary, like coming out of the cinema, looking up into the trees to see like chimpanzees. But just like, my point is that, you know, there are these like moments when you see art, it just really moves you and you just feel so, it's not even empowered, I don't even know what the word is, just like exhilarated, you know, and really moved. So I always just feel really appreciative of people who make work, whether they're writers or artists or filmmakers, because they're moving us all the time, you know.
On the sort of flip side of this question, I'm curious, and this is, something that I'm grappling with in my own writing as well, is are there sort of discourses or genealogies or sort of frameworks that you sort of refuse to throw your 2 cents in? Are there any kind of, discourses that you feel alienated by that, you don't want to speak to?
I think Nan mentioned earlier the sort of, and also Roxanne talking about Goodreads and all these forms of popular criticism that I think are good. More voices, like lift every voice, you know. Mm-hmm. But with that, there is a sort of, there are certain discourses that I don't enter purely because of the figure of like the fan. Mm-hmm. I just think that I'm not equipped, perhaps aesthetically, but definitely not in terms of can I fight well enough to like talk about Beyonce. Because it might lead me into an altercation that I don't want to be in or whatever. You know what I mean? Like this, you know, what do I want to fight a Barb and write about Nicki Minaj? No. Those opinions I may keep to myself. More broadly, though, I do think that there is benefit to writing outside of, I don't know, your chosen frameworks or your chosen lineages, partially because I think you learn new things about yourself every time you do that. I have recently had the pleasure of every time you have a kid and suddenly you get to watch this process of sort of inculcation into taste happen again. My daughter's here, so is my nephew, so I've been like looking at little kids a lot. And one thing that's interesting to me is, you know, the first time you go to the doctor after you have a kid, they ask you, are they responding to you moving your hands in front of their face? Do they respond to sounds when you touch them? In other words, the initial sign of health in this human mechanism is how are their senses? How do they respond to outside stimuli? It's like immediately the stakes are set that this organism is not meant to operate just within itself. It only operates insofar as it responds to what comes in from the outside. We are responsive beings. We are in constant communication with the outside. And therefore, the way to continue to check on that health is to continue to introduce new stimuli. My daughter, all of a sudden, has tastes. At the beginning, whatever you offered, fine. Now there's a cracker on the little thing, and there's a little piece of cheese, and she wants the cracker. And it's like, I thought you liked cheese. What happened? But to me, that, and of course, to have a child is to witness your own capacity to drastically overinterpret things. So like, take it with a grain of salt. But it seems to me that means that that already this child has a hope, or an ideal experience. When she's like, it's eating time, there's something that she wants. I don't know if it's savory, I don't know if it's crunch, whatever. All of a sudden, there's like a platonic ideal. And everything that she encounters, like, I don't know, meets that, exceeds that, falls short of it, expands it, whatever. And so to me, like, criticism is to stand somewhere in between the ideal, the hoped for, and the actual. Not just in art and politics, everything else. Everybody knows this. You leave your house hoping for a certain kind of day, and it's not that kind of day. I did not know it was going to rain today. So I think encountering new things, I think, stretches something that I do want to keep elastic in my life, in my writing, and my encounters with new phenomena.
I, too, don't dabble in reviewing anything that people are psychotic about. And Taylor Swift, for example, plenty of thoughts. Nice gowns, beautiful gowns. But I value my safety. And also with Beyonce, I can't be critical because she's perfect. So what more would I say? It is what it is. I'm actually writing a book about Beyonce, and I'm like, it's basically going to be 300 pages of look at her. She sang in the rain for 3 hours and looked perfect. So obviously she's a demon. But if I can't engage critically, if I can't either do something other than be entirely rapturous about it or entirely hating, like if I'm at those two extremes, I know that it's not for me to engage with because I'm not going to offer the reader anything useful. Fan service is like what you do with your friends in the group chat. I'm like, girl, did you see what she did in that outfit and the hat and the cape and the whatever? But when you do that in a review, it starts to seem like you're doing PR for the thing that you're reviewing. And so I try to look at things that are interesting and that I might love, but have something critical to say about. Not negative, but critical, where I'm really questioning it and how it was made and why it was made, et cetera. Unfortunately, we tend to live in a, not we tend to, like right now the world is weird and people have developed some really unhealthy parasocial relationships with products, with celebrities, with movie franchises. And that has created a really toxic space where there's no room for criticism and no room for engagement and for thinking and being a little more expansive. And that is really worrisome as a critic to wonder what's going to happen if I publish this review about this supposedly sacred cow. And, you know, it used to just be that people would complain online or leave a nasty comment, but now it's death threats and doxing, and that happens particularly to Black women who do criticism. And I will say Black people and people of color more broadly. The kinds of threats that I tend to get, I know that my white counterparts are not getting. And so just logistically, sometimes you just have to make a decision like, you know what, I'm gonna let Taylor have this.
I don't really do social media, and I mean, I did have an Instagram account, but many years ago when I had a Facebook account, there was a friend who was talking about British hip hop. And it is a thing, but back then it was, you know, it wasn't terribly good. It's way better now. I mean, it's not hip hop; they call it grime. But and my friend was talking about British hip hop, and as a joke, I said hip hop is dead, which was a terrible thing to say. And then all these people came for me, and I was just like, I will never make a comment ever again on someone's social media platform, you know, thing, because people really are serious when they, and I think because, you know, that we all know, like, you know, they're hiding behind the screen or whatever, so people tend to be, you know, more villainous than they would do if they were talking to you face to face. So I find it just scary. So that's something I veer away from it. yeah, I find it scary because you don't know who the people are, and it feels sinister to me.
Yeah, I had a friend who wrote a review of the Renaissance album when it came out, and she received death threat after death threat for her review.
And it was I know which review, and it was very good.
Yeah.
It was a brilliant review,
was
which
really good.
just shows people don't have taste.
Yeah, exactly. On that note of taste, actually, what I wanted to ask was, I guess when it comes to sort of working at places like the New Yorker and, having such a sort of public presence in general, for each of you, how do you grapple with sort of integrating voices and covering subject matter that wouldn't otherwise be covered, while also sort of being at the forefront of sort of major institutions?
Yeah, it's really interesting, especially working in theater reviewing as I did for about 5 years. There was a time when not really the New Yorker, but certainly the New York Times could, with the impact of one review, close a show, and therefore exert a lot of not only influence but material power over the lives of other people. That is a power that I'm not interested in, and there are many things to lament about the waning influence of the media, much of it bad, but I am glad that that is not part of how I have to think about my work. I don't want to impact somebody in that way. But one way to think about the relationship between sort of writer and audience, especially in terms of platform, is, especially in the theater, think about it, much theater that happens in New York, you write about it in a national publication, but 90% of the people that read it will never have seen the thing. And therefore, your review is not just this moment of taste or gatekeeping. It is, in fact, the show itself for many of the readers. And so one way to think about platform is in a sort of democratizing mode. Come along with me. The relationship between writer and reader doesn't become like this one, right? Like I'm up on a stage and I'm looking at you. Instead, it's something like this. Look at this with me together. A companionate relationship between writer and reader. And so that stance, that ethos is something that I'm really interested in. And to your point about choosing things that I think, hey, maybe this would not be written about if it wasn't me. That's a great and empowering way to think about selecting things to write about. And yet, to me, that's the part that should not feel like an exertion. It's the thing that should flow organically from the whole sort of matrix. The whole thing the questions that you were asking before, what do I feel that I always want to respond to? What might I not? Those things are instinctive. And I think if you train yourself to follow them and not edit them or sort of tutor them before they are able to sort of actually emerge into your mind, the more you'll look back at the things you've written and say, wow, that does sound like me. That is not something, in my experience, that can be done like willfully, assignment by assignment, but is kind of emerges as the product of a body of work that, one way that this is really important is learning which assignments not to take. To say, editors bring things to you, and it does often take a certain kind of confidence, especially at the beginning of things, to say, no, no, no. And a lot of no's also adds up to a body of work, too.
With platform, one of the things that I have come to realize over the years is that you don't necessarily realize just how many people read the New York Times until you do. And so I try not to think too much about platform in that if I think about the fact that hundreds of thousands or millions of people are going to be reading my thoughts, then I start to censor myself or overthink the work. And so before I think about platform, I'm just trying to not think about platform. But I also know, like Vincent, I'm never going to write something, hopefully, that would like end someone's career. But I also think people overestimate the power of criticism at times, because I once reviewed a comedian and he was bad. And he contacted me, I think, via email, and he said, you know, are you just trying to end my career? And I'm like, if anyone ends your career, it's going to be you. And it's, you know, he's doing fine. He's a multimillionaire. Like, literally, he's fine. And so I also think about, like, who I'm critiquing. I'm never going to punch down. If I'm going to write a deeply critical review of something, I'm going to do it about people who can take the hit and who can survive it career-wise. I'm never going to like write a scathing book review of a small press book. Now, there may be a lot interesting to say that is critical, but so few people are engaging with that thing already. You are the doorway to that book for a much larger audience when you're reviewing it. And so I have to be able to offer the reader something that's more than just, is this good or bad? And that's always, I teach cultural criticism as well, and that's what I always tell my students. Nobody cares if it's good or bad. Like, you have to explain why and how you got there and how you developed that opinion. So I just try to keep all of that in mind and try to be consistent in terms of my standards. And every once in a while I do remember, oh crap, so many people are gonna read this. But I never want it to compromise what it is I have to say. So it's, you know, and it's a negotiation and it's ongoing.
Yeah, I think there is a responsibility, and when I've interviewed artists, visual artists, I like to work with them. So I will do the interview, write it, and then show it to them before I publish it, because I like to work, you know, alongside and collaboratively with people. I don't want anybody to feel surprised when something's published and they're saying, oh, I don't feel, I feel misrepresented. I think if I'm doing it in that way, then I feel like I'm working with integrity to my practice, and that makes me feel like safer, like I'm doing a good job. And then also I feel a bit safer, like no one's going to come for me as well, you know. So yeah, I don't really feel, I do feel like there's a responsibility, but I think like you're both saying, I don't think there's the power of the critic like it was like when Roberta Smith said that, you know, black art is terrible. I don't think that's, you know, she wouldn't have that same power that she did when she said that in the 80s. So yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna go to the Q&A. Somehow we zoomed through this moment, but yeah, folks have questions, they can go to the back.
Hi, I thought someone would be up here. So first, I want to say, Roxanne, I do think of you as a fiction writer. Untamed State is one of the best novels I've ever read. And I think I've said this to you before. And I also want to say thank you to Vincent for the idea around like an ideal that is created through refusal. Because you talked about that both with your daughter and then again with saying no to work. But two things, I want to combine two of your thoughts. Roxanne, you talked about taking your time, or criticism on your own time. And Vincent, you were talking about criticism that dwells or that elongates our experience with something. And I, when I was hearing all those things, I thought about how criticism comes out so quickly. Like, people are still trying to be the first to say a thing. So we end up with some criticisms that I think have like very shallow, like the same talking points that are just hooked onto anything that comes out. And for me, that means that a lot of criticism, the person who is writing it has removed themselves. And I'm really curious to how you feel about like the idea that as writers, we're writing through something or writing towards something, and how do we make sure that that is also an important part of our criticism, and like naming like what it means to write in a moment of grief or what it means to write in a moment of joy as you review something.
Yeah, it's difficult. Thank you so much for this lovely question. On the one hand, the part of me that is prone to procrastinate and, in fact, never produce anything is grateful for some of the sort of speedy time signature of journalism and criticism, right? That somebody is, in fact, waiting for the thing helps bring the thing into being for me, right? So that is part of it. And I do find that what you're talking about, this sort of not necessarily personal criticism, but a criticism that is about using artworks or apprehending them as sort of signs of the times, like taking seriously when something enters history, when it enters the contemporary or whatever, is something that whether I'm given longer or shorter, to me it's just simply like become maybe a method, something I've tutored myself to think about. And in fact, it becomes one of the first things that I kind of bring to the table with me before I'm able to get anything out, right? That helps me work at whatever speed. I do think that there is a temptation to kind of rattle through the issues or the whatever. That's something that a work of art kind of wants to be understood by, and as Roxanne mentioned, that's when you get into the PR thing, like you're writing a blurb instead of a review or whatever. But yeah, I think all of these things happen, and for me, whether I'm given time or not, I'm always faced with the same problems. So that's become, maybe it's because I'm a little bit less afraid than I was before about whether like a piece of writing will in fact appear. That this problem that you're pointing to almost doesn't matter what the time signature of when I need to produce the thing.
Go ahead.
I would like to say that I'm really enjoying the panel, and I'm glad that you guys are here today. I have a question that I would like for the whole panel to answer. Some criticism is factual, and some are just our paradigms. So I would like for each of the people on the panel to answer. If you were reading an article and your name wasn't mentioned, how would you know that the critique was about you? The factual one and the paradigm.
If I was reading a piece, my name was not mentioned, how would I know it was about me?
Yes.
Oh.
The factual one and the paradigm.
Could you repeat what you mean by that, the factual and the paradigm in this case?
Right, like if I was just to say, well, I don't know, you're too hard on people when, I don't know, like any criticism that you would have to mention is factual, whether, you know, some people say things about me that I know are factual, you know, maybe I laugh too much, you know, but something that is a paradigm that whether I like it or not, you know, is your opinion that I wear short skirts, you know, something like that. That's your opinion. Your way of thinking, you know, your life. Maybe you don't like short skirts, so that's your paradigm. You won't wear short
Right.
skirts, you know?
You know, I think that if I was reading a review of my work and my name wasn't mentioned, you know, it just depends. The factual things would just be details from whatever it is that I've written that are fairly well known at this point. But some of the more ambiguous or ethereal stuff that people would be talking about would probably be like, oh, she's too centrist. She is both sidesing it. Which, I'm sorry, but never in my life. It's pretty clear. But I feel like those are the kinds of things that people would say about my work
Yeah, okay, thank you.
that would not necessarily be factual.
I'm not really sure. I think I'm not really sure what somebody would say about my work, and I don't know if I really care either, you know? I think I would just, yeah, I don't think I would really care. Unless it was like scathing, if it's untrue, I mean, I think my position is that if you believe something bad about me, then that's up to you, you know?
I think factually they would say it uses a lot of M dashes. They would say that, and that'd be a true fact. They could also take it or leave it, but it is true. And I think in reading people writing about my novel, there's a lot of attention paid to like the amount of time that I spend. This notion of sort of elongating time often means that I like to describe things at length, and also true fact. But whether that is pleasant to you, I find varies a lot. And to me, it matters quite a lot. It's my favorite thing to do. It's like relay what somebody's face looks like or something like that. So I found that mileage varies quite a lot on that question.
Next question. So, like, do you mean like censored? Yes. Do we ever feel censored? No, absolutely not. I have really great editors, and they know who I am at this point, so they know what they're gonna get. And I've never, I think I've also been lucky, but I've never been told not to publish something or not to say something or offer an opinion. And I'm grateful for that. Editors in general, in my experience, are really wonderful. And instead of trying to censor me, oftentimes they're like, sharpen this point, be clear, provide evidence to support this argument you're making. They're always offering feedback in service of the work. Oh, there is one time. I write for a paper that doesn't like to critique other media. And so one day I went in on CNN and I had to take that part out. And so sometimes there are just company standards, and so it's not even my editor, it's more just a company approach to how they talk about other things.
Hi, yes.
Please come to the microphone if you will have a question, up to the microphone.
Hi, thank you so much for coming to talk to us at the Schomburg today. I'm a student at Fordham University where I study Black cultural theory, and I was wondering, obviously you guys are very established in your careers right now, so you don't quite have the same problem that many young people have entering the writing business at the current moment, where you're kind of expected as a Black writer to write specifically and solely about Black things. At Fordham, I just wrote an article critiquing the Virgin Suicides, the book and the film, for my school's literary journal. And I originally wrote it for a creative writing class, and some of my classmates didn't quite understand my perspective because the movie, if you've seen it, is very white, and I was bringing a kind of Black critique to it that maybe you can't see in the film's diegesis, but I can see just as a Black viewer of the film. So I wouldn't say I got critique, like improper critique or anything, but they just didn't quite get it or understand what I was trying to say. So as when you guys were younger in your careers, how did you go about moving through the critique that doesn't even try to really meet you where you are?
I'll say that it certainly comes up even now, this notion that if you're Black, you're gonna review Black authors, you're gonna review Black theater, et cetera, which actually fine. But, I mean, it's great, so it's fine. But that you don't have the range to do anything else is something that people often believe. And so you never know what I'm gonna do from one project to the next. And so fortunately, because I've always had a day job, I have had the freedom to do whatever I want. Because like this little funky ass review is not gonna pay my bills. And you're not gonna stress me out. And so that is very, very helpful. So like one, get a day job. But just because the expectation is there doesn't mean you have to write to that expectation. And you do not have to publish only the kinds of things, the sort of sharecropping criticism. You don't have to do it. You really, really don't. And there's simply no publication out there that's worth it. you're not going to get anything from it in the long term, even though there may be that expectation. The one thing I tell my students all the time is that you don't actually have to cannibalize yourself or your cultural experiences in order to be published. And if you're interested in the virgin suicides or something else that people would not necessarily think, for whatever reason, a Black person is interested in, that again speaks more to them and their own biases. And I always just like to sort of reverse the situation and say, so why don't you think I should be reviewing this? Because then you get to have fun watching them try to answer that question.
And white people write about us all the time, so why shouldn't we be writing about, and I mean, Jeffrey Eugenides, he wrote Middlesex as well, right?
Yes.
That's a freaking amazing book, so I completely support you, and I don't understand why your classmates are like, why are you doing this? I think it's great that you have the range and you're interested in not only Black literature or Black film, Black visual art, which of course, I mean, that's what I'm interested in, but I'm interested in other things as well. I don't only listen to Isaac Hayes, I listen to Grizzly Bear and Fleet Foxes as well. There's a range of things that I'm into. We don't need to be myopic about our experiences. So I think, yeah, absolutely. I think it's great that you're having those experiences. We just need to not listen to them.
Now all I want to know is whether Isaac Hayes ever listened to Fleet Foxes, but that's a separate issue. Also, I just think learning how people respond to your work in ways that are satisfying or unsatisfying to you is a way of understanding who your audience in the future might be. So it's also just data, right? Like, it doesn't even have to be something that you sort of personalize or make make your problem, right? It's just something interesting to know. So that, I mean, if only for that, I guess, something to see.
All right. Thank you so much.
Hi. You guys have kind of answered my question, which was about cultural competency in addition to cultural criticism, and you spoke about range and data. Could you just expound on that a little bit for those that are aspiring journalists and people that are involved in the cultural economy, the creative economy?
Well, I think there is such a thing as cultural competency, but I do also think that writing criticism is a way not only to sort of confer an education, but to achieve oneself. Mm-hmm. That that continual encounter is a way of learning. And so, to me, the ideal critic is not the person that has a PhD in the thing that sort of, therefore the review becomes a way to convey expertise. Rather, I'm interested in somebody that can really write and is really curious. That to me is better, not better, but more pertinent a sort of skill set than necessarily, I know everything about this kind of music, therefore let me kind of be your guide through it.
I think there's a certain joy in that aha moment.
That's right.
When you're learning about something and writing about something as well. So I enjoyed the panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. Well, I am also a critic. I write film and music criticisms, and I think it's really interesting. I just would love to hear your take on this kind of, I don't know if it's the rise in anti-intellectualism or lacking, I don't know, people just wanting to enjoy things. But I can't sometimes turn that critic brain off when I'm consuming something, and so I get the whole message of let people enjoy things, just let people enjoy things, or things like that whenever I am thinking critically about a piece of media. And I'm curious of how do you consume and not overly, are you always on the critic mode, or is that always how you consume things? And also, how do you respond to that kind of it's just a song, it's just this, or it's just something for people to have fun to, or something like that?
Well, when people say that, nobody's forcing you to read the criticism. Sorry, but it's, you come across this a lot, like, oh, don't yuck someone else's yum. And it's like, you came to me. I didn't come to you. I think that if you go to someone who says, I love Beyonce, and then shove a deeply critical review in their face, that's one thing, but nobody's doing that. Who has that kind of time? And so a lot of times what people are doing is expressing an anxiety, a fear that there's something wrong with them for enjoying something that you were critical about. And so you really just have to, however you want to approach it, but I always just say, why do you feel so defensive about your love of this? I personally love Survivor, and I know it's nonsense, but if you criticize it, that does not change my love at all. And so it also might mean that their loyalties to this thing are fragile, or they know what the problems are and they're embarrassed by the fact that they enjoy it. And so it's about them, and you really just have to ignore it. It's just a song. Well, yes, and this is how I choose to spend my time. But it's hard for me to engage with anything uncritically. I try, and of course I watch all kinds of nonsense and trash, and it's great and it's very healing. But it's hard to leave my brain aside. If I go to something and something deeply misogynistic is happening, I can't just be like, oh, it's all fun and games. Like, I start to think, why did they do this? Why did they make this choice? Like, oh, there's something really problematic here that I want to get at. I'm actually writing a piece right now about the cultural excess that we're kind of experiencing, where people need to see more and more radical things to feel something. And starting with like OnlyFans creators who are doing these like extreme-ish like group sex things. And how we're seeing this like with all of the shows about serial killers that are kind of like coming up with the more and more macabre things because we have become so culturally desensitized. And that's because I was watching something, I don't even remember what it was, but it was like Love Island levels of trash. And I just remember thinking, it's amazing to see how reality television has gone from what was pretty genial and normal to this really kind of vicious thing where only one kind of person thrives. And so people are going to feel some kind of way, but it's not about that. And I feel some kind of way about the fact that I feel compelled to write this thing, but it's because I can't turn off my critical mind. But it doesn't mean I don't enjoy anything. I enjoy pretty much everything.
We unfortunately need to end it there, but thank you, Nan, Roxanne, and Vincent.
Thank you, Daniela.